Welcome to the Salt and Light Council. I'm your host, Dran Reese, and tonight our guest is Rosemary Gibson. Rosemary is off the charts amazing, so this is really for us a real honor to have her take time out of her busy schedule to be with us. I'm very excited about introducing you to her. What you're going to hear tonight is disturbing on many levels. Rosemary is the senior advisor at the Hastings Center and perspectives editor for JAMA Internal Medicine. She worked with Bill Moyers on the PBS documentary On Our Own Terms. She's a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. She's on the board. Her qualifications are off the charts. I'm just going to read a few. There's so many pages, but she's on the board of MedStar Institute for Quality and Patient Safety. She's on the board of the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. She is also the recipient of the highest honor from the American Medical Writers Association for her outstanding contributions to the public interest on reporting on healthcare issues. Her first book, Wall of Science Island, puts a human face on the Institute of Medicine report. To Err is Human, Treatment Trap, Battle Over Healthcare, and Medicare Meltdown. These are all the books that she's written on the healthcare industry today. But her most recent book is what we're going to talk about today, China RX, exposing the risks of America's dependence on China for medicine. Her books have been reviewed by Publishers Weekly, Washington Post, Health Affairs. She has also been referenced, her writings in such proceedings as the U.S. Senate. She is mentioned in congressional testimony. Bottom line, we have the source, and we're very excited. Rosemary, thank you so much for taking the time with our church affiliates and the people that we have on the phone. God bless you for being with us, and the floor is yours, Rosemary. Are you there, Rosemary?
Thank you for the good work that you do. We can go to the next slide, Dran, and we'll jump right in here. This is an untold story that you'll be hearing about today, and it's about the dramatic shift in where our medicines are coming from. About 5 years ago, I wanted to write another book, and I was looking for a really important story in the interest of our country to write about. And I stumbled on this incredible thing that's been happening with our medicines and how we're so dependent on China for so many of them. And it's been hidden from us because there are very powerful forces that don't want us to know, because 95% of Americans don't trust medicines from China. Next slide, please. So this is China RX, exposing the risks of America's dependence on China for medicine. We donate proceeds to good causes. It took 3 years to research this, just to figure it out. And it's another 18 months to find a publisher, because it's not exactly a topic that a lot of people want us to know about. So I hope you'll find, if you can look at it in your library, in local bookstores, and there's an appendix that can tell you where you can find out where your medicines are coming from. Next slide, please. One of the most shocking things I discovered, in which people are amazed, is that we can no longer make penicillin. The last penicillin plant here in the U.S., it was located up in New York State in Syracuse, and it was huge. At one time, it supplied 70% of the world's supply of penicillin. And I suspect a lot of people on this call have taken it or know people who have taken penicillin. But that plant closed in 2004. And the reason, unequivocal reason, is China and its domestic companies formed a cartel. Next slide. I want you to know that this work is data-driven. There's 900 footnotes in this book on 57 pages. This chart isn't in it, but it shows, here's how we lost our ability to make penicillin. And by understanding this, you can understand how we lost the ability to make virtually all of our generic antibiotics and how in just 5 years, 10 is too long, 5 to 7 years, we won't have the ability to make 90% of our medicines, which are generics, which is what most people take, because China will distort and manipulate prices and control the market. So this is how we lost penicillin. And it's just, you see those bar graphs, and they're going up, and that's because it's global production. This is from 1996 up to 2007, and this information came from European companies. And a gentleman there, very public-spirited, shared this with me because he has been deeply concerned about this for about 25 years, what he has been seeing. So what we see happening is, as a share of global production, China, there's sort of the bluish lines. You've got the tall bars and the ones just below it, the bluish bars. That's Chinese production. And you can see it was real small in 1996, started to increase in 97. And look what happens around 2000, 2001, 2002. We opened up free trade with China in 2000, which basically eliminated all tariffs on Chinese products coming into the U.S. So what happened was right around 2000, and look at that yellow squiggly line. It starts at the top and then it goes down. Look what happens in 2004. That's when China dumped penicillin on the global market, and that's price. They really lowered the price, and they kept it low for 2004, 5, 6, 7, and then they increased it. What happened in those years? The Chinese companies drove out all U.S., European, and even Indian producers of penicillin. And once they gained dominant global market share, they increased price. This is how we lost our ability to make penicillin, and we have virtually no capacity to make other generic antibiotics. Next slide, please. And this is the same playbook over and over and over again.
Rosemary, I don't suppose that you can speak up just a little bit?
Oh, sure.
Thank you so much.
Okay, is that better? Good. Thank you.
Yes, much better. Thank you.
So because what happens is China controls the key ingredients to make generic antibiotics. And when it controls the ingredients, it means we can't make the generic antibiotics for anthrax exposure. Think of that. So when we had the anthrax attacks in the United States in 2001 in New York, in the media offices, on Capitol Hill, in post offices and mailboxes, when the U.S. government needed to buy 20 million doses of an antidote for anthrax called doxycycline, some of you will know that antibiotic is used for Lyme disease and so many other conditions, we don't make it here. So the U.S. government had to turn to a European company. I spoke with the CEO, good company, conscientious, but they had to get the starting material from a plant in China. So we can't make the generic antibiotics to treat strep throat, ear infections, urinary tract infections, pneumonia, Lyme disease, tooth infections, sexually transmitted diseases, superbugs, and so much more. Even last resort antibiotics. China has a chokehold on global market share. And we just let it leave our country. Next slide, please. So how dependent are we? This is a quote from a gentleman I interviewed who was, by the way, making this doxycycline after the anthrax attacks for the U.S. government and military. And he said something so profound. He said, if China stopped exporting the key ingredients, the things that make medicine medicine, to the U.S., within 3 months, all the pharmacies would be empty. That's how dependent we are as a country. Next slide, please. So China really has a chokehold on the key ingredients. These are like the rare earths of our medicines. But now they're rapidly ramping up production of generic drugs made in China by Chinese companies and sold in the U.S. So the next series of slides are the labels of generic drugs made by Chinese companies that are sold here. Thank you, Dran. Next slide. So this is a chemotherapy product made in China. You can see it there in the top left corner. Distributed by a company in Cranberry, New Jersey. And people undergoing cancer treatment in the U.S. some of them are receiving chemotherapy made in China by their domestic companies. Next slide, please. This is an antidepressant made in China, distributed by a company called Salco in New Jersey, Cranberry, New Jersey. Next slide. Birth control pills made in China. Right there in the bottom right corner. Thank you for the pointer. Next slide, please. This is Alzheimer's medicine. Again, Salco is one of the top distributors, the subsidiary of the Chinese company. And they have a side company called Princeton, Princeton, right next to Princeton, New Jersey, Princeton. They changed the names to make them sound American-type names. Next slide, please. This is an HIV/AIDS medicine. This is one of the first, this was the first generic drug made in China by Chinese companies and sold here. That began in 2007. And most people, when they get their prescription drugs, they don't see this label. It may come in one of those orange plastic bottles with a white cap. And these are labels that you can find on the internet at a website called Daily Med. It's run by the National Institutes of Health, National Library of Medicine. Next slide, please. This is the common blood pressure medicine, valsartan. And this company, I'm sure some of you have heard about the enormous recalls of blood pressure medicines because they contained carcinogens. This started last July and it continues to this day. Millions of Americans taking blood pressure medicines, including valsartan, had their medicines recalled because of the presence of this carcinogen. Now, this company is one of multiple manufacturers of the pills, but this company is a huge supplier of the key ingredient. And they supply many finished drug manufacturers around the world. And the FDA took the unusual step. They went into this plant because they were this was the worst offender in terms of having the carcinogen in blood pressure medicines. This was the worst offender because the Food and Drug Administration found that this company had product that contained 200 times the acceptable limit of a carcinogen per pill. And if you're taking these products every day, it's extremely, very, very troubling situation. So the FDA went in and not only did this company recall its product, the FDA went in and banned everything from the factory that this company was making. And what's especially disturbing is that this company in China knew that it was sending substandard products to the United States, but didn't do anything about it. And by the way, the carcinogen in this product was used to make rocket fuel. Next slide, please. This is the antibiotic doxycycline, again made in China by Chinese companies. So what if China's the anthrax attacker? We don't make the active ingredient anymore for the two recommended antidotes for anthrax exposure, doxycycline and ciprofloxacin. We do not make the active ingredients for those essential antibiotics. Next slide. One of the most shocking things I learned, and this is a journey that we keep peeling back the onion and keep learning. Earlier this year, 3 of the 4 largest Western generic drug companies announced they are cutting 50% of the products they make. And why is that? Because they can't compete with China on price. And so the good guys get out of the business, and what we see is China achieving its stated aim to become the global pharmacy to the world. It's on track to do that. And if we don't do anything in 5 to 10 years, we won't be able to make 90% of our medicines. Next slide. Many people know India as a large generic drug manufacturer. That is absolutely true, but one of the most shocking things I learned when writing China RX is that India already depends on China for 80% of the key ingredients it needs for its medicines that it makes for the U.S. and other countries. And then as China ramps up generic production, it will probably overtake India, simply because it has an industrial policy, knows how to form cartels, manipulate its currency. And China's dominance that is becoming global, without question. Next slide, please. When I was asked to give testimony at the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, which is a congressionally appointed commission, just a couple weeks ago, something that just hit me, and I said it publicly. I said, whoever controls medicines controls the world. You know, there's a lot of talk about rare earths and steel, but that's very important. But whoever controls medicines gives enormous power, not only over countries, but also people in a very, very personal way. Next slide, please. We can go to the next slide. Tran, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you.
No, my apology. Can you still hear me okay? Is this all right?
Well, you go a little soft every once in a while, but it's very compelling. We're just riveted, so.
All right. My aim is not to frighten, but to enlighten.
Amen.
Yes, amen. So this is a documentary, a screenshot from a documentary that was aired in the Netherlands, done by Dutch public television earlier this year. And its main message that Europe depends on China just as much as the U.S. does, if not more so. And it was like a textbook example of everything that I discovered in China RX. These producers identified the exact same thing in the Netherlands. The only difference is in the Netherlands, the industry and government officials were willing to go on air and talk about this issue, whereas here in the U.S., nobody wants to talk about it, and that's what we need to change. And this is a picture of a gentleman who worked in the industry in the Netherlands for many years, and he's been deeply concerned, and this is a quote from him: "Now we're afraid that China will do things to deprive us of our medication," which is incredibly profound. And that's not an issue of tariffs. And by the way, I don't think that the tariff and trade war here for now, I don't think China will do anything to cut off supply of medicines in the foreseeable future. And the reason is simply this: China is still dependent on Western pharmaceutical companies to help them to further develop their own domestic industry. It'd be very unwise for them to mess around in this space and impede the flow of medicines to the United States. But eventually, when it doesn't need Western pharmaceutical companies anymore to expand its research and so forth, then it will all bets are off what could happen. Next slide, please. One of the most remarkable discoveries is that the U.S. military also is dependent on China for medicine. And of course, we know what's happening in the South China Sea, so the young men and women in the U.S. military who serve on the aircraft carriers there, they can look out across the water and see that they're dependent on the adversary for essential life-saving products. Next slide, please. That speaks for itself. What if China is the anthrax attacker and it controls the anthrax antidotes? Next slide, please. So as we lose the ability to make our medicines, we lose control over supply, we lose control over the quality. It's happening now. And we lose control over price. And one of the conclusions I've come to is that the FDA cannot fix the quality problems with generic drugs. Next slide. And the reason for that is, I'll describe this picture in a minute. The FDA is already making trade-offs between allowing defective medicines into the United States to prevent shortages. So those are the two things it's contending with. And why is that happening? It's because the supply chain has become so narrow. There's so few manufacturers, and most of them increasingly are being concentrated in China globally. And if anything goes wrong, if there's an earthquake, if there's a global pandemic, and it affects the manufacturing capability in different parts of China, the world is in a very, very difficult situation. You know, the world wouldn't allow all of its oil, or the vast majority of it, to come from a single country. It certainly wouldn't allow it to come from China. We wouldn't rely on China for our food commodities like wheat and corn. But here we've allowed the outsourcing of our medicine production. It's so profound, and perhaps why that was the reason it's so difficult to uncover this. Next slide, please. Just very quickly, this gentleman and his son, this is a Johns Hopkins trained physician, walked into the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, Arizona for a stomach ulcer. They kept him overnight just so he didn't have to drive back home. The following day, he got 2 large doses of a blood thinner, heparin, and within 11 minutes, clear documentation, unequivocal, his heart started to fail. He was in multiple organ failure within minutes. And the following week, his heart had to be removed. He was put on an artificial heart machine. And it's alleged that he received contaminated heparin made in China. This was in 2007 and 2008 when the Chinese put a lethal contaminant in this blood thinner that's widely used in American hospitals. And this poor gentleman died 3 months later after a terrible, terrible death. And his wife took legal action. It's one of the few cases to survive to almost go to a jury trial, and that's because she's a physician and she knew the medicine, and the lawyers in the court system couldn't pull one over her. So this has real human consequences when we allow China to send defective medicines to our country, and we don't have the controls in place or even the capacity now to make our own. Next slide, please. And I want to hurry up so you have time to answer your questions. This is just an example of an FDA warning letter. This was the company making the contaminated valsartan blood pressure medicine. Next slide. Next slide. This is how bad the amount of carcinogen was in this company's product. Next slide, please. FDA has grave concerns. It's unusually harsh language. Next slide.
You don't have to go too fast. We're in good shape.
Oh, okay. Next slide. So here's proposed steps. What do we do? And this was presented in testimony to the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission on July 31st. Next slide. One of the most stunning things I learned from while doing China RX is that it's no one's job to know who controls our medicines. We know who controls our oil and energy and our food supply, but it's no one's job to know who controls our medicines. So one of the recommendations is, and I wrote this up, a draft executive order to require the National Security Council and all the important entities in government to track and forecast who controls the supply of our medicines, where are their sole source, fragile suppliers in countries like China, and to make recommendations for how to assure we have an uninterrupted supply of medicine. Next slide, Dran, please. Thank you. A second recommendation is that Congress allow the Department of Defense and the VA to buy based not on the cheapest price, but on value. Value means protecting our troops. It means national security. And right now, it's an incredible situation. The U.S., all of us, we're helping China achieve its goal to become the pharmacy to the world and enabling the collapse of our industrial base when our money to go to buy medicines for the DOD and VA go to China. So the recommendation is that Congress gives the DOD and VA the leeway to buy based on value, not cheapest. And I have had the pleasure of briefing a number of people in the DOD on this at the mid-level who really appreciate having a voice. And the DOD testified also at this commission and acknowledged that we have a very serious problem. Next slide, please. Real quick, we have incredible technology here to make medicines differently. We can make them here at home, could dramatically expand economic prosperity, and we just need some investment and some good thinking to bring that to bear and to make it happen so we can make our medicines here in the United States. Next slide. And finally, if you like bacon for Sunday morning breakfast, it probably comes from Smithfield, which is owned by a Chinese company. It was sold a number of years ago. And it turns out pigs are a source of a really important ingredient necessary to make a blood thinner. Without it, hospitals would shut down. And the recommendation is that there's a group called the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. That this is a really bold statement, but they should require the Chinese owner of Smithfield to sell it back to a U.S. owner in the interest of our national health security. So I'm going to stop there, and I would love to hear your thoughts, questions, concerns. I hope you'll take a look at China RX. I wrote it for all of us because I love our country. I care about our future. And together we can make a difference. Just after the hearing, there's great news coverage, and now the National Security Council is looking into this. The DOD leadership is on notice. Even military personnel on the front lines are getting wind of it. So that's huge progress, and I am optimistic we can push forward on it. So thank you, Dran, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, Rosemary, that was amazing. What I'm going to do is now bring everyone else into the call. So we are going to go on to Q&A. So everyone, please listen to the instructions. Let's take a moment. Okay, for anyone who would like to ask a question, I guess you jump into the queue. I think another faster way to do this also is *6. So we have our first question coming from Wynn Adams. Wynn, go ahead. Ask your question.
Yes, this is Wynn Adams calling from Florida. How do we get copies of these slides?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. If you were a Salt and Light Biblical Citizenship affiliate, then these slides would be available for you on our membership page. So I highly recommend that all of you become, we get joined together and become a team working together. So we can talk about that later, Wynn. But thank you for asking, because I agree with you. Our Salt and Light affiliates will then take this presentation. They'll be able to access it from the membership page and then get to their churches and their groups.
The reason why I ask is I have a meeting with my Senator Marco Rubio on the 21st of this month. Can Jan Morrow get these slides?
Well, you're a special group now that you're bringing that up, and so the answer is yes, Wynn, we will definitely work on that. So why don't we talk about that maybe tomorrow morning? I will be
works
here.
For me.
Have a conference call. So, Rosemary, are you okay with these slides being presented there?
Oh, absolutely. I wish I could give you even a larger slide deck. It just has some other.
No, this is good enough.
Great. Go for it.
This is long enough. I'm also a member of AMAC.
Wonderful. Well, Wynn, I'm so grateful to you. This is what we have to do, and Marco Rubio is on the right side of many of the China issues. So this will be, just great to push that forward. Thank you for offering that. And my email is on the next slide. Dran, feel free to email me when.
Okay.
RosemaryGibson100@gmail.com.
All righty.
Thank you,
All
sir.
right, Wynn. Thank you so much, Wynn, and we'll definitely be in touch. Thank you for joining us. All right, we have another call. Please tell us your name. You're up.
Hi, I'm Vince. Right now, I'm in Iowa. This is very personal to me because I was on Valsartan.
Yep.
Now, I have been switched to what is now called Losart. Is that different?
It is a different blood pressure medicine, but it operates in basically the same way, but it is different, yes. And a challenge is when you get a different medicine, your body could feel differently, and it can be a little, could raise some concerns. You just feel not the same way. How's that going for you?
It seems to be working all right. I was told the reason that they because my insurance was no longer going to pay for the other one, but now I think I understand why.
Oh,
now
interesting.
Explain it.
Well, not all Valsartans were recalled, but so many of them were. You should have gotten a recall notice. Somebody should have informed you if, in fact, it was recalled.
I was just told my insurance company would no longer cover it, so they switched me to this other medicine.
I think the problem is they couldn't get it because so much of it was recalled. That's probably what was going on.
From what you said, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Vince, for
much.
sharing that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so for those of you that are having trouble getting through the Q&A, you can also type a question into the chat box, and I'll be sure to acknowledge you if you haven't quite figured out how to do Q&A. And I think you can also press *6. Here's to hoping, *6. Let's go to Larry Dersham. Larry. Larry?
Oh, Rosemary, yeah, I had a question. Are most of these medicines still invented and patented in the U.S.?
Larry, it's a great question. There's basically two types of medicine. One is the generics, which are off patent, and they're like commodities now. We buy them like T-shirts, or the big companies buy them like T-shirts and supply them with them. And that's 90% of the medicines. Then there's the other category, which you hear most about. Those are the ones that advertise on TV, and they're about 10% of the medicines we take, but certainly a whole much larger cost and price. So those are the ones that you'd be referring to. Typically, those drugs, since there's only one supplier and those companies make a lot of money selling them, they typically are made with a little bit more care than the generic commodities that are just bought on the open global market at the lowest possible price.
So if it's a generic drug like a blood thinner, do they have like name brand blood thinners that we still make here, but they're just much more expensive?
Well, there was the company that was involved in this heparin incident 12 years ago was Baxter. They supplied it. It's a very well-known company. But they ended up supplying medicine that happened to be contaminated with a lethal product. And that would be called it gets a little complicated, but some brand name companies do sell generic drugs. And then there are lesser known companies like these Chinese firms that also sell generic drugs. Does that help?
Okay, yes, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, please feel free to email me if you'd like more clarification. It's a really complex market. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Larry. And we're going to Rob and Lucinda.
Wait, can you hear me?
Yes.
Wait, my question is, we hear constantly from the mainstream media that foreign governments are able to affect our elections. If China was to manipulate the drug market and say blame President Trump for maybe the trade war or tariffs or things like that, is that something they could possibly do in an effort to affect votes? Is that possible?
My opinion is that China will use lots of ways to affect the outcome of the 2020 election. I don't think that they will mess around with our medicine simply because they still are at a relatively early stage in their development of their pharmaceutical industry, and they're still relying on U.S. and other Western big pharma companies, the brand name companies, to be able to help them do that. So they probably don't want to jeopardize the supply of medicines to the U.S. now, for now, because they still need us to grow their own industry.
Thank you.
Help, Rob? Yeah, thank you, sir.
Okay, well, I think we're pretty close to the end of our session. I really want to thank everyone for joining us, and I actually think that your executive order is a great idea, and you should be the one put in charge of that, Rosemary.
Yeah, well, if you know anyone who can get me to be in charge of it, let me know.
Well,
and I'll need everybody's help here.
Oh, praise God! Great job. Thank you so much for all the research and the time that you took to put this together. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure I speak for everybody. This is, if we didn't have enough, crazy news with the media and all that's going on with the swamp creatures, this just takes it to a whole new level. To think that we have given up our health care to
China.
Shocking.
It's shocking. And this is why it was so hard to find out, because they don't want us to know, because they know it would be bad for business. That's what I was told by someone who used to work in the industry. And what's also shocking...
I want to ask you a question. What do you think we should do now? This is, for all of us that are, we have another call coming in. We'll go ahead and another question coming in. We'll let them be the last one. But
sure.
What do we do? What do we do?
The first thing we have to do is, when you're going to be talking to Senator Rubio, let's spread this around, because people don't know. Many members of Congress don't know. So that's the first step. Share it with friends and colleagues, family members. We can't fix it until we know about it. Second, I think the best way to start is from the national security angle and to get veterans involved. When veterans find out about this, they really light up over it. And so let's get the VA as well as Department of Defense to stop buying medicines made in China. That would be a great place to start. Let's get on the Veterans Affairs Committees, the House Armed Services Committee. Some military folks that serve on House Armed Services have asked for legislative ideas. We need to get the Veterans Committees on board, and that would be a great way to start. We made a lot of progress just in a year, and now we've got to see if we can get some legislation that would make sure our procurement dollars, our taxpayer money, is not going to China for our military and veterans. So if anyone knows any veterans groups, any military groups, anybody on any of the committees, I would love to talk with you offline and see what we can get going or build on what we've already started.
Amen to that. Well, Rosemary, I'm hoping that we can do a lot more with you, because I'm grateful for your accessibility and for spreading the message. I hope we get a lot of wherewithal with this lecture series that we've just done today. So all of you on the phone, you've got a task in front of you. So we'll take one more call, one more question, that is. Okay, go ahead and tell us your name.
This is Jan Morrow. I think you answered my question by laying out some of the action steps that can be taken, to combat this issue. So I want to thank you, and I just want people to know that in about 2 weeks, I think mid-September, beginning September, the New American Magazine is going to feature a quite a lengthy article on China RX.
I just reviewed the draft, Jan.
Oh, you did? Okay, great. It's going to be a cover story, I hear.
Yes, it's going to be huge, yes, and Rebecca Terrell did a great job on it, and I'm just so grateful to everybody, and I truly believe on this issue, this is a kitchen table issue, I truly believe that we can make a difference here.
Wow, well, that's going to keep you really busy. Once that publication gets out, Rosemary, it's going to be hard to get a hold of you.
Oh, no, I will. It may take me a while to get back to folks, but no, I'm committed to this, and
Amen.
Nothing will go unanswered or undone because it's too important for all of us. This is life
Amen.
and death. It's our health, our well-being. It's our country. And I'm so grateful to every one of you for listening tonight. Dran, for your leadership. Gail, for your help. Jan, I got to get back to you on that thing we talked about. And all your questions. Wynn and Larry and Rob and everybody, thank you so much. And for those of you who are listening.
Well, I thank you so much. Do you want to take one last question?
Sure.
I looks like we have one more person, and then this is it. This is it, and we're going to close it up. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right. Jessica Adams.
Hi, Dran. It's Lynn in Maryland. I just wanted to say that tomorrow morning on C-SPAN's Washington Today, one of the segments is going to be on prescription drugs. So, and thank you very much for the information. And remember, all the pigs in China had, that disease, and they had to slaughter a bunch of them. And it was Congress that approved the sale of Smithfield a few years ago to the Chinese firm.
That's absolutely right. We let it go. And I can bet you on C-SPAN Washington Today, I'd be shocked if they would discuss this. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's very hard to get the media, even C-SPAN, to address this. If you want to contact me, my email is rosemarygibson100 @gmail. And there's some videos on the internet if you Google China RX, and some other things if you want to have some video and other resources. And truly together I believe we can make a difference. I have faith that we can.
Well, amen to that. I'm going to just pull up the website real quick, China RX, for those that are...
I confess to not having a website because I just don't have the time.
Okay, what website do I look up?
Just Google China RX and my name, Rosemary Gibson, and you'll see a whole host of articles and news reports and video clips.
Okay, here we go. Real quick. All right, there you are. China RX right here is the book on Amazon. Okay. Yeah, well, we need to help you get a website maybe.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah, may I say something?
Terry Barnes, are you still there?
May I say something? No one paid. I spent 3 years doing this, and no one paid me to do it.
Aww.
I did it because I care, and no one. People would pay me not to do this because they don't want this story out.
Wow.
And there's a Fox News clip. I can send that clip of testimony. I've got to get moving on that, but just trying to keep up with having the chance to spread the word. I'm so grateful to all of you.
Well, we're grateful to you. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. So just want to thank you once again, Rosemary. Great job for your work. I'm just grateful to make this connection and draw deeper in with you. Really appreciate your work. And we just appreciate all of you out there once again. Thank you for joining us here at the Salt and Light Council. Remember, try to get a Salt and Light ministry in your church. We need the church to rise up. We need people to be salt and light and start taking action. Here's a great action item right here that we can all do is start working with the veterans in our local areas to make them aware of the sub-inferior medications that they're taking on a daily basis. That is horrible. And we need to, that's just awful what is happening. And I cannot believe that we're giving up our international intelligence and our secrets to China. We're literally empowering the enemy to do us in potentially, and we need to stop this right now. So thank you once again, Rosemary. Thank you to everyone. We appreciate all of your time and everything that you're all doing to advance the kingdom of Christ in government. And so we thank you, and good night, everyone.
Good night.